like I said, from that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him. And, you know, and that's the way my radar was always up anytime that I had to, you know, interact with.
That Tuesday in Texas changed everything when The Undertaker stepped into the ring with Hulk Hogan and nearly left in a coffin. For decades, he stayed silent about what really happened, but now he is opening up and the details could destroy Hogan's reputation forever. When heroes reveal their true colors, The Undertaker has never been the type to exaggerate. For years, he was WWE's ultimate company man, stoic, loyal, and secretive, but when he finally broke his silence about the night he says Hulk Hogan nearly destroyed him and his career, the details were absolutely damning.
You know, Hogan claims that I heard him on the tombstone during the pay-per-view, right? So I'm thinking to myself, like, I didn't find out till Tuesday. I knew there was going to be another pay-per-view, but I didn't know that I was going to drop the belt back. And I came up.
Think about that moment when The Undertaker had just been crowned champion, a monumental achievement that should have catapulted him into superstardom. This wasn't just any title change. It was WWE betting its future on a character unlike anything the wrestling world had ever seen. And yet within days, the belt was ripped from his hands under the shadow of Hogan's supposed injury. To understand the weight of this betrayal, you have to understand the climate of professional wrestling in 1991. During the build-up to the Monday Night Wars, when every decision mattered and every storyline could make or break a career, Hulk Hogan wasn't just a star, he was a global phenomenon who transcended wrestling itself. The face on lunchboxes across America, the voice of Saturday morning cartoons, and the muscle-bound hero in Hollywood movies like No Holds Barred and Mr. Nanny. To Vince McMahon, Hogan was more than a wrestler. He was the golden goose, the cornerstone of an entertainment empire that generated millions in revenue through merchandise, licensing, and pay-per-view sales, with his image plastered on everything from action figures to vitamins, creating a multimedia empire that made WWE a household name. But empires don't last forever, and by 1991, cracks were starting to show in the foundation of Hulkamania, with Hogan's grip on fans slipping like sand through his fingers, his once untouchable act beginning to look stale and formulaic, and boos trickling in from sections of the crowd tired of the same old routine. The say your prayers and eat your vitamins message was losing its luster, and McMahon, always looking 3 steps ahead, knew he needed the next big thing. That's where The Undertaker came in, a character so revolutionary and different from anything wrestling had produced that he represented a complete shift for the industry. Tall, intimidating, and cloaked in supernatural mystique, The Undertaker wasn't colorful spandex and catchphrases. He wasn't about flexing muscles and patriotic speeches. He was darkness personified, mystique made flesh, and something fans had never experienced before in professional wrestling. His entrance alone, with haunting organ music, flickering lights, and an otherworldly presence, sent chills down the spines of audiences nationwide. And within a year of his debut, McMahon had strapped a rocket to his career, recognizing his unique potential to capture fans in a way traditional personas could not. Survivor Series 1991 was supposed to be his crowning moment, the night he toppled Hulkamania and ushered in a new era of sports entertainment. But Hogan wasn't going to let that happen without a fight, and his weapons weren't limited to what happened inside the ring. The first red flag came hours before the match even started in a detail that might seem small to outsiders, but sent alarm bells ringing in The Undertaker's mind. Because normally wrestlers arrived at the arena around midday following an unspoken routine that had been established for years. But that day, Hogan showed up much earlier than usual. Unusual for a veteran who knew the business inside and out, and suspicious for someone who typically followed protocol to the letter. And The Undertaker noticed immediately.
I remember getting there about noon, and Hogan was already there. And I'm walking down the hall.
Red flag number one.
Red flag number one, right? So he goes, hey kid, can I talk to you, right? And he goes, hey, I got this neck injury. He says, I'm really nervous about taking your...
From that moment on, Hogan began playing a subtle but relentless game of psychological warfare that would have made a military strategist proud. Because every time he crossed the Undertaker's path that day in the hallway, in the locker room near catering, or backstage before the match, he made absolutely sure to remind him of one thing: remember my neck. Over and over like a mantra designed to plant seeds of doubt and fear. The message was crystal clear that if something went wrong during the match, even the slightest mishap, the blame would fall squarely on the Undertaker's shoulders. It was a masterclass in manipulation meant to shift responsibility before anything had even happened. And it was being waged against a 25-year-old wrestler who was still relatively new to the main event scene, still proving himself in an industry where one mistake could end a career overnight. The last thing he wanted was to injure the biggest star in the company, the man who could make or break his future with a single word to Vince McMahon. So he did what any young, eager wrestler would do. He reassured Hogan constantly, promising again and again to protect him during the finish and to execute the Tombstone Piledriver with the utmost care and precision, never realizing he was being played like a pawn in Hogan's larger chess game. Hogan's supposed paranoia about his neck wasn't paranoia at all. It was strategy, pure and calculated, the setup for what would become one of the most controversial moments in wrestling history. When the match finally arrived with thousands of fans on their feet and millions more watching at home, The Undertaker delivered the Tombstone Piledriver exactly as promised, executed with textbook precision, secure, protected, and safe. Every precaution taken and every detail considered. And he knew with absolute certainty that he had performed the move flawlessly. But the moment his knees hit the canvas, Hogan began his Oscar-worthy performance.
I was asking, where's Hulk at, right? And he's always laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there, he's laid out on the floor, and here come the paramedics and stuff. So then I hear, somebody get my wife and kids on the...
The crowd gasped in horror as commentators scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. Medical personnel rushed to ringside, and The Undertaker froze in complete shock, his heart sinking as he believed he had just paralyzed Hulk Hogan on live television in front of millions of viewers worldwide. The match ended with The Undertaker declared victorious, but the victory felt hollow and meaningless, because in his mind, he had just destroyed the most valuable asset in the entire wrestling business. The championship that should have represented the pinnacle of his career instead felt like a curse, a constant reminder of the moment he thought he had crippled his childhood hero. This was psychological manipulation at its finest, and The Undertaker had fallen completely into Hogan's trap. When truth becomes stranger than fiction, what happened backstage after the match was nothing short of theatrical genius, if you can call deliberate manipulation and career sabotage genius, because the drama that unfolded behind the curtain was more intense and scripted than anything that had happened in the ring. And it would haunt The Undertaker for days to come. Backstage, the performance only escalated, as Hogan didn't just sell the injury for the cameras. He turned it into a full-scale medical emergency that would have been worthy of an Emmy Award. And the scene in Vince McMahon's office was pure theater, carefully staged to convince everyone from the boss himself down to the newest ring crew member that The Undertaker had genuinely injured the company's biggest star.
Like, no, man, I just couldn't hear it. I was like, no, man, I heard him. I don't know what, I couldn't put a thought together.
This wasn't just selling an injury for the television cameras or playing up drama for the fans. This was Hogan making absolutely sure that everyone who mattered, especially Vince McMahon, believed beyond any shadow of doubt that he had been seriously and potentially career-threateningly injured. The call for his wife and children was the masterstroke, the detail that would convince even the most skeptical observer that this was a genuine medical emergency. And The Undertaker stood nearby completely mortified and confused, watching his hero writhing on the floor in apparent agony. His big moment, what should have been the greatest night of his career up to that point, was overshadowed by guilt, fear, and the crushing belief that his professional wrestling career might already be over before it had even truly begun. For days following Survivor Series, The Undertaker carried that psychological weight like an anchor around his neck. the guilt overwhelming him, consuming his thoughts, and robbing him of any joy during what should have been the honeymoon period of his first WWE Championship reign. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't think straight because every time he closed his eyes he saw Hogan's face twisted in pain and heard those haunting words, "Oh, you got me, brother."
Finally got to see, but by now a lot of the boys had come up to me and they're like shaking their head like his head never got anywhere close to the mat. And you watch it back, you can tell his head's never.
Imagine being 25 years old, new in the company, carrying the crushing weight of believing you had just crippled the man who was WWE personified. Because that kind of guilt doesn't just eat away at your confidence. It devours your soul, your self-worth, and your ability to function as a human being. The Undertaker was living in a nightmare of his own making, carefully crafted by Hogan's masterful manipulation. But the truth has a funny way of surfacing, especially in an industry built on illusion and deception. Until that Tuesday, when he finally had the opportunity to watch the match back on videotape. The Undertaker remained consumed by guilt and self-doubt, but when he sat down to review the footage, expecting to see the moment he had destroyed Hulk Hogan's career, what he discovered instead changed his perspective on both the incident and Hogan forever. The truth was undeniable, captured on tape for anyone with eyes to see. Hogan's head hadn't even come close to hitting the mat. Not once, not even remotely close.
From that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him, and and that's the way always. Then my radar was always up anytime that I had to interact.
It was a revelation that hit the Undertaker like a lightning bolt. He hadn't injured Hogan at all. The entire medical emergency, the paramedics, the calls to family members, and the dramatic collapse in Vince McMahon's office had all been an elaborate performance designed to protect Hogan's position and undermine The Undertaker's credibility. The other wrestlers in the locker room had seen it too, and their reactions spoke volumes about what had really transpired that night. Because these were professional athletes who understood the mechanics of wrestling moves. Who could spot a legitimate injury from a fabricated one? And who knew the difference between selling and outright deception? When The Undertaker finally confronted Hogan days later, armed with the knowledge that the footage proved his innocence, the excuse Hogan provided was so flimsy and transparently absurd that it only confirmed what The Undertaker had already begun to suspect. A seatbelt was on too tight. That was the explanation Hogan gave for what he had claimed was a career-threatening neck injury. Not that his head had hit the mat, not that The Undertaker had botched the execution of the tombstone piledriver, but that The Undertaker had held him too tightly during the move, essentially blaming careful and protective execution as the cause of harm. It was in that moment that The Undertaker's entire perspective on Hulk Hogan shifted permanently and irreversibly. As the man he had idolized, the hero he had looked up to, and the legend he had been honored to face in the ring revealed himself to be something else entirely. A manipulator, a politician, and someone willing to destroy a young wrestler's career to protect his own position. The aftermath of Survivor Series 1991 represented far more than just a controversial finish or a disputed injury claim. It was organizational chaos, a perfect storm of manipulation, politics, and corporate decision-making that left lasting repercussions throughout WWE. What should have been The Undertaker's coronation as the new face of sports entertainment instead became a masterclass in how one individual's influence could reshape the entire trajectory of the business. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect was how Hogan and WWE management leveraged the controversy for financial gain, essentially monetizing the manipulation for maximum profit. When the rematch was announced for this Tuesday in Texas, scheduled just 5 days after Survivor Series, fans thought they were going to see the resolution of a legitimate controversy, with marketing framing it as a chance to settle once and for all what had really happened between Hogan and The Undertaker. But in reality, it was a carefully orchestrated bait dance which designed to squeeze more revenue from an audience that had already paid once for what they believed was a decisive conclusion. The numbers tell the story of fan disillusionment and corporate greed working together. Because Hogan and Vince McMahon didn't just manipulate The Undertaker and bury his championship reign. They exploited the controversy to sell another pay-per-view event less than a week later, convincing fans they needed to buy a second show to see the real ending. The fact that the second event drew significantly lower buy rates proved that fans weren't buying into the narrative, both literally and figuratively. And the psychological impact of that night in 1991 would reverberate throughout The Undertaker's entire career, shaping not only his approach to backstage politics, but also his fundamental worldview about trust, loyalty, and survival in the wrestling business.
Grew up seeing Hogan as this great thing, and
bigger
then
in life Americana kind of deal, and then obviously you know, he gets caught on tape, you know, saying some derogatory racist things, and you know, in this day and age,
I think
people
also,
are gonna, you know, they're gonna react, and they're not gonna react in a
This wasn't just disappointment or professional disagreement. It was a fundamental shift in The Undertaker's understanding of how the wrestling business truly operated behind the scenes. The lesson he learned that night that even your heroes can betray you. That trust is a dangerous luxury in professional wrestling. And that survival requires constant vigilance would shape every interaction he had for the rest of his career. But the Survivor Series incident wasn't an isolated example of Hogan's willingness to manipulate situations and sacrifice others to protect his own position, as other wrestlers would echo strikingly similar stories over the years, painting a picture of a man consumed by paranoia and desperate to maintain his grip on power no matter the cost. Wrestling fans, contrary to what promoters often assumed, possessed an intelligence and intuition that couldn't be underestimated. And even in the early 1990s, long before the internet made backstage information widely available, audiences sensed when something wasn't right. Many began to whisper the once unthinkable that Hulk Hogan had faked the entire injury for personal and political gain. And when Hogan's personal scandals finally erupted into public view, from the racial rant that got him blacklisted from WWE to the lawsuits and legal troubles, the wrestling world was finally able to see the man behind the carefully crafted public persona. We grew up seeing Hogan as this larger-than-life figure